Good morning, everyone. This is Bethany. Thank you all for joining us today. Over the past weeks, we have had so many questions about virtual school and e-learning, and we wanted to get you those answers from the best possible source. So today we're excited to have Jeff McCoy from Greenville County Schools on with us today. I'm going to bring him on in a minute. And before we get started, I'll just warn you, normally I tape these at night when my house is pretty quiet because I put my kids to bed first. Well, that's not the case today. So if you see an extra kid running around or a little bit extra noise, just please forgive me because I'm a mom just like you or a parent just like you, and you know how it is these days. So anyways, I'm going to pull Jeff onto our stream. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Bethany?
Yes, thank you so much for coming on today with us. We have so many questions. So readers, I know that a lot of you have asked questions. I have a long list that I compiled from the things that you have sent in to us to ask Jeff today. But if you have a question that you're wondering, go ahead and put it in the comments, because if we have time, we're going to try to get answers for anything that you post there that we don't already have on our list. And Jeff, can you just start just by telling us what your position is at Greenville County Schools and why you know so much about this topic?
So my role right now is the Associate Superintendent for Academics. I've been in this role for about 4 years. And so my team is the one that's responsible really for everything from special education to, career and tech education to early childhood. So anything academic falls under my department.
Well, thank you so much, and we're excited to have you answer these questions. So I think the biggest thing that we have just heard over and over again is we think that our readers would really just love to hear you walk through what does a virtual school day look like, especially like comparing for the different grade levels, and then talk us through how that will differ from what the e-learning days will look like for children that are in-person school.
Sure. So starting with the virtual program, for those of you who signed up for the virtual program, that day is going to look a little bit like traditional, except it's going to be obviously through the computer online. You may have seen the schedules we put out, some sample schedules with that. There will be live sessions throughout the day, so that's going to be very different from it was for many people in the spring with the e-learning. Some teachers did live sessions, others, as we were transitioning, that was all brand new, so we were still training Okay. And all of that. But everything else will look very much like a regular school day. The blocks are broken up, so we'll start with K-5 to 2. The early childhood, everything's broken up in the blocks of 30 minutes. That does not mean that when it says live, they're going to be live for 30 minutes. That's going to be grade level appropriate. So for a partner or a first grader, it might be they're doing a 10-minute live session. And then that teacher will pull some small groups of kids virtually to work with those students, much like he or she might do in a regular classroom. That time might increase a little bit as you go up, 3 through 5 grades, and certainly as you get up in the middle school. Again, we don't expect teachers, and we've gone over and with the training, the teachers, and we don't expect them to be 50 minutes live lectures and lessons. We've gone away from that in traditional school. So again, it might look like they do a 10-minute lesson, 15-minute lesson, and then they're pulling small groups of kids or doing an activity with the whole class, just like they might do in a regular school. High school probably look very much like the normal high school. High schools are handling their virtual programs in-house. And so basically a student would have a period-to-period schedule they would follow, and they would be broadcast. In this case, they would be broadcasting that live. The teacher would teaching them live and doing, again, a lot of the different things, 10, 15-minute, lesson, and then going into some activities either with small groups or whole class or even sometimes individual children.
Okay, so for the students that are younger, if they're having like a 10-minute lesson and the teacher is moving on to help them in small groups, what do you envision is going to happen to the kids who are not being currently helped by the teacher?
So those students will be working more independently. There would be work assigned to the kids, obviously, like there would be in class. So typically in the classroom, a teacher might do a lesson with the whole class, and then the kids would go to work independently on, whatever it is, math, let's say. And so they might be working on that, adding, subtraction in the classroom while the teacher's actually working with a small group of kids or even going around individually and working with kids. So it would be a blend of, independent work versus, live interaction with the teacher. And when the good thing, I guess, in this model, though, is when a kid gets stuck, they'll have a teacher there they can reach out to, and that teacher can then, through Google Meets, work directly with that teacher.
Okay. And then for the kids that are in the virtual school program, will their day then take the typical amount that you would expect for normal in-person school? Like, will they be starting at 7:45 and working until mid-afternoon?
Yeah, so we're going to keep the same schedule as we do in a normal school. Now, that's not going to be 6.5 hours on the computer. There will be live sessions throughout the day with independent work in there, still the related arts. If a child's in gifted, talented, they would still go and get their gifted and talented services or their SPED services. The typical kinds of services they would get in school, ELL services, they would still get. So that's going to look very similar, but they're just not going to need to be on the computer for 6.5 hours, particularly the younger kids.
Yeah.
They will even have, obviously it's going to be very difficult. You can't really learn handwriting on the computer. And so, they would still be doing that traditionally on the paper. So there'd be independent time where they could practice those letters that they're learning to write, and those types of things. So it's going to be, we're very cognizant of screen time as well. That kids don't need to be 6.5 hours staring at a computer screen.
I think all the parents are glad to hear that. We agree. So what are you telling parents who are wondering how much hands-on time they need to plan with their child if their child is in virtual school?
So the goal of this model was really to minimize that as much as possible. Obviously, that's going to depend on the child, as some parents have reached out to us and said, I have a child who really needs the parent to stay on top of them all day. And so, the child that may be like that's going to probably need a little bit more one-on-one attention from the parent, just like that child might need one-on-one attention if they were in the brick and mortar school, and then other students are very much, you can kind of tell them what to do and sit down and they would do the work. Kindergarten, first grade, probably kindergarten specifically, given that is an age where that is their first time in school in many cases, unless they went to K4, that's probably going to take a little bit more hands-on from the parents, unless their child is just very independent. But, that's unusual at the beginning of school, even for kindergartners, that, they don't need a lot of teacher direction.
Yeah, plus, or they just want their mom to sit with them all day.
Right.
I have kids like that.
And that may be the case, too. And then you have some very independent kindergarten. I've been in classrooms where there's some very independent kindergartners who very much want to do it by themselves, but, it's going to vary on the child.
So can you tell us, how are they taking attendance in virtual school?
So the attendance is going to be taken based on the students logging in and doing the work for that day. We do have some parents who have said, I'm not going to be able to work with my child until that night because of, maybe they're a healthcare worker or first responder or any job really.
Yeah.
So in order to accommodate that, we have set up in our attendance plan that we've submitted to the state. Now, unless they change that, the state does. Our goal is that when they log in, as long as they log in and do the work, whether that's during the live sessions or during that, they at 7 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night, do that and log in and work, they would be counted present for that day.
Okay, that's good to hear. When do you think you'll hear from the state on whether they've approved that or not?
That was part of our plan. I don't know that they really need to approve it. It's just whether they'd send more direction or guidance down. We submitted what we were planning on doing, and they didn't really give feedback that was right or wrong on that. They didn't give us any feedback that you can't do that. I think they are trying to be flexible as well with seat time waivers and that kind of thing. So we believe right now that that's the model we'll follow, and the state is in agreement with that.
Can you tell us, will there be homework for virtual school?
So our goal in elementary that we've talked to our administrators with, who will then be working with our teachers next week in their PD week, is really that we want everything to be done during the class work during the day. That's our goal in elementary anyway, even during the brick and mortar schools. Now, obviously, as you get into some of the higher level classes in middle school, if they're taking high school courses or if they're in high school taking AP courses and all that, that may not be able to be fully done during the day because of the requirements and workload or dual credit. But specifically for elementary, we kind of want that expectation to be, if they can get that work done between, the hours of 7:45 to 2:15, that's really our goal. Knowing again, the parents can certainly choose to, do the work with their students live during the day, or if they need to take a break in the afternoon and then go, resume at 6, they could certainly do that as well.
That's helpful to know. So now walk us through that. We just talked about virtual school for those of you who are coming on, which is where you are signing up for 100% virtual school. So now we want to ask about e-learning for the days when kids who are in-person school are home learning.
Yes. So that obviously, if we're in 100% e-learning, whereas all kids are home e-learning, it's going to look very much like what I just described with virtual programs.
Okay.
So teachers will have the ability to do live lessons and all of that, just like they would if they were in the virtual program. If we're on that 1 or 2 day attendance week, The teachers would obviously, the students are attending, let's say, 1 day a week. And so during that 1 day a week, because of the social distancing that's in place, they would only have 5 or 6 kids in a class. And so
wow.
they're going to, there's a lot of benefits to that, obviously.
Yeah.
They'll be able to really kind of personalize the instruction for the students. They would front load as much as possible to the students as they can on those days without overloading them. But more, teachers will be kind of balancing out what are the harder concepts this week. And so we'll do that while we're face to face, versus when the kids are home at eLearning, they maybe not have as many, difficult, maybe things that we know kids would typically struggle with in class. But we have worked all summer, my team, and we've hired teachers to help us this summer in curriculum to actually build instructional videos and activities so that the teacher can post those throughout the week for your kid. Let's say they attend on Monday. So then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they would go through and work through those activities. There'd be instructional videos. And then the teacher in elementary would check in with that kid, well, really elementary and middle. They would check in on that student, during their planning period, which is typically 30, 45 minutes. Would check in on their class just to see, did anybody get stuck? Was there any questions that I can answer for the students? And then again, hopefully the next week they would be back on their, 1 day a week, Monday attendance. They could clear up any questions the kids would have. The benefit of that 1 day or 2 day is going to be that if kids do struggle during the week, they'll have a little bit more one-on-one personal time in the 1 or 2 day to be able to clear up any misconceptions during the week.
This wasn't on my list of questions I sent you, but do you have any idea yet how many students are going to be in these classrooms for in-person school?
So on the 1 day week, really in person, the 1 day attendance week is really probably 5 to 6 kids. In the 2 day a week, if it was 2 days a week, it could go anywhere from, really 10 to 16. 16's really been our cap, but most schools have really been a little bit even under that 16. With half the class, it'll be 50% of your class being there. Very few of our classes and core content classes ever exceed 30. So 15 really typically is going to be your max. Of course, trying to balance that sometimes difficult. One day you may have, 6 kids, and one day you may have a little bit more than 6. When you combine those into 2 days, that may be more like 15 kids or 16 kids, whatever it happens to be. But really 16 is where we cut off for the 2 days to be able to still social distance in the classroom. Okay,
that makes sense. Now, how many kids will be in a virtual classroom?
So the virtual classroom is going to be very similar to the brick and mortar. So 20 to 25 students for grades K and 1, 25 to 30 for grades 2 to 5, and then for grades 6 to 8, really we've said 150 to 180 students. A typical teacher's classroom is going to be in middle school doesn't typically exceed 150. So we're going to try to keep it at the 150 range, but anywhere from 150 to 180, depending on how many kids we have coming over to virtual.
Okay. And for these classes, are the kids going to be coming on the computer and just watching the teacher, or will they actually be in on Zoom on a webcam?
So they would actually be on Zoom. Well, it's not Zoom, it's Google Meets.
Okay, Google Meet, thank you.
So yeah, they would actually be on a webcam. The Chromebooks we're issuing to all students in grades 4K to 12. They all have cameras on them. So the students can join the Google Meets. The whole point of this model is really the interaction. So it's really not just a lesson we want. We want to be able to say, now Bethany, what do you think about, that? What was your answer, Bethany? So whether they're holding up something or they're taking a poll on Google Meets, we do want the kids as much as possible to interact with that. And during for the elementary grades, of course, they will have a reading group just like they would have in the brick and mortar school. And so again, that's a very kind of personalized group that you're in. And so the teacher in that group is going to have the student read, would have you read just like they would in a brick and mortar classroom with that group. So we want it to be very interactive.
That makes sense. Can you tell us, someone asked, can you complete virtual learning outside of the country?
So you can complete it technically anywhere. We really wouldn't know where you were as long as you have access to the internet. For elementary students, like I said, the critical piece to that really is that reading group. That's the only one we really can't record. We're recording everything else. So if you can't, for some reason, if you have a doctor's appointment that day and you can't do the math lesson live, that's recorded to be able to do it later on with your students. If you or the students can watch it later on independently, depending upon their grade level. But yeah, the reading group though is going to be a very, like I said, personalized. And I need to hear you read, and I'm helping you through the strategies to help you read. And so that's going to be very difficult to record that and get any benefit out of that. So we do ask parents to have, said, I can't really do that with my kid during the day. What we said is that if at all possible, if they could at least get on during that reading group time, the rest of it technically could be done anytime during the day.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your training is like for your teachers right now with virtual learning?
So we've done a lot of virtual learning over the summer. It's particularly on the flipped classroom, which you can use that model regardless of whether it's in person or whether it's a virtual model. That would be really where they're able to front load content to students. That could be a short video to watch. And then when they get into the virtual classroom or the brick and mortar classroom, they're doing activities around what that concept was. Many of our teachers use that now, have been using that in the brick and mortar. We expanded those trainings this summer. We had many of our teachers in there taking classes this summer on that. And then e-learning best practices. So how to design e-learning or virtual program, how to design lessons, what's the best practice. Things like if you're going to do, if you're going to front load a video, it shouldn't be a 40-minute video. None of us, even adults, most of us, if we go to YouTube, we're not going to watch a video over 5 or 6 minutes.
Right.
Keeping those same practices of, what's best practices for e-learning. Now for the virtual program, obviously teachers are not on contract during the summer. So those classes that we offered, and we offered every week classes from really June really to up to August. For the 5 days next week we have with teachers, we'll be doing full 5-day trainings with our virtual program teachers next week. All of those things I just talked about and best practice with e-learning. And then our instructional coaches were trained the last 2 weeks. So they will actually be re-delivering that same training to their teachers in the schools next week when they have those teachers for the 5 professional development days.
Okay, thank you. So we had a question, I think you've already answered a little bit of this, but it's, will teachers teaching via e-learning in the virtual program be using the Google G Suite of Tools apps, or will they be using something else?
Yeah, so all teachers will be using Google Classroom.
Okay.
For our younger ones, teachers do have the option of using Seesaw or Google Classroom. We're emphasizing Google Classroom because it has a little bit more parent, there's a guardian feature in there where parents can see things and all that in progress. But in our younger grades, 5K to really probably 1st or 2nd grade, we do have Seesaw in the virtual program for teachers if they choose to use that as well.
Can you tell us, can we hook external hardware, for instance, like a headset or a monitor to the Chromebooks?
Yeah, so yes, many of our students do use headsets already with their Chromebooks. The Chromebooks have an HDMI port on them. So if your monitor is HDMI, you should be able to hook a monitor up to it if it's got an HDMI input. If not, you can usually buy an adapter that actually converts VGA to HDMI. So you just kind of have to look and see what monitor you have and whether it supports HDMI or not. And if not, any of the Best Buys, Walmarts, Amazons would sell a converter from VGA to HDMI.
Will there be any fees for the Chromebooks?
There are no fees this year for the Chromebooks, obviously unless the students lose them. But as far as our normal fee we've been charging the last couple of years, we're not charging those fees this year. Parents really just need to pick them up on that leap week of school, or to pick them up that week or the following week so that the students have them ready to go for virtual. And that's going to be, some people may have already received some communication from their homeschool principals or their, the school they attend. Principals will be communicating that as far as the pickup times. And we do have some other things, some other handouts and some other materials that our virtual program students will need to pick up. So they have that stuff available at home.
Okay, so can you talk us through what will happen if our kid breaks the Chromebook or loses it?
So if they lose it, then you need to contact us. We do have, if it hits the internet, as long as it hits the internet, we can track the Chromebook down. That's how we track them a lot of times, and we can tell you, where it is or if it's stolen. A lot of times that's how we do that, is find out where it is if it's stolen. As far as breakage, though, it'll be similar to that spring. We're planning on setting up repair sites around the district. So you can just contact us. The teachers, in a virtual program, they could contact their teacher and just say, hey, I broke my Chromebook. We'll send out directions to everybody in the virtual program to say, hey, if you have a problem with your Chromebook, here's where you take it. But anytime they can reach out to the teacher and the teacher can remind them of that. But we've got typically 4 sites around the district scattered, so it's close to parents to be able to just drop it off. And when they drop that off, they will get a loaner Chromebook so that they can then take that home and continue working on their schoolwork.
Okay. Can you tell us, will the students in the virtual school use textbooks?
So all of our stuff in the virtual program is digital that we've designed. Most of our textbooks from the state now are also in digital format. That was a requirement from the state a couple years ago. So as they've adopted new textbooks, most of them come with a digital format as well. If textbooks, now there are some consumables that we will still be sending home with kids in the virtual program. For example, I talked about the handwriting paper. That's going to have to be something we send home with students to kind of a physical textbook. Outside of that, if parents, particularly maybe middle school, if they needed a textbook, as long as the school has textbooks for every child, they certainly could check one out if they felt like it would, be helpful. But there is a digital version in most textbooks for that, a PDF a lot of times. If they have a class set at the school of textbooks, like many of our schools do, they would not probably be able to check that out because they would need that for the students who are attending the brick and mortar. So for example, in middle school, you may have 150 kids you teach a day, but you only have a class set of 30 textbooks. Typically because a lot of times the teachers don't use them as much. They're using a lot of their own resources or digital resources to teach the students with.
That makes sense. Will you have a list of supplies that the virtual students need to buy?
Yes, we are going to be releasing those this week. We will probably ask the schools to post those on their websites. I know the tax day is coming up. I think is it Friday? Maybe this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's this weekend.
I think it's this weekend. So we'll be releasing those for parents prior to this weekend, so that they have, if they want to go out in the tax days and buy, they can. A lot of stuff you probably will have at home already. We do have some optional supplies the parents can purchase if they choose to. For example, one of the things that we put in packets for parents are elementary age parents may be familiar with base 10 blocks, which are just how we kind of teach the conceptual math with elementary students. And so we've linked to Amazon where you could buy a $20 set of base 10 blocks if you want your kids to actually have the blocks to do that. Or we've got those in a handout, so to speak, where you can actually cut those out and use those as well. So we're trying to provide both opportunities, but there is an optional supply list as well that parents do not have to purchase, but for those who may want to purchase, they certainly could.
Great, that's helpful. I know everyone's been wondering about the supply list, so they'll be glad to know that we'll have it soon. Yeah, we just so you know the timeline, that we just finished the curriculum for the virtual program. We were waiting until we were completely finished with the curriculum to make sure we had a complete supply list of what was needed. It's going to look very typical, though, to a supply list, scissors, crayons. I mean, it's going to look very similar to that you might have in a regular school. Obviously, we're not going to ask you to bring hand sanitizer and those types of things because you'll be at home. So some of that stuff will be a lot less probably than, maybe some years past. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, can you talk to us a little bit about the LEAP days? How will that look for virtual students? So virtual students, and the LEAP days, again, are not required. We're required to offer those. Students are not required to attend if parents don't feel comfortable with that. We've had a lot of parents reach out, and that's fine if you don't feel comfortable sending your students. For the virtual students, they would attend in the afternoon. It's going to be really to come in and do this. A lot of it's going to be assessing. The state is requiring us this year to do a pre and post test with all students on last year's content. And so that test would be administered right at that time during the LEAP. They would also be able to get their Chromebook and any other supplies that would be needed taken home. However, again, if parents are not comfortable sending their kids that week, they can also just go by and pick up their Chromebook, pick up their supplies without attending the LEAP days. Obviously, for the virtual program teachers, that's really not. We're going to do a virtual meet the teacher night as well. That's really not that time to meet the teacher because in many cases, a teacher's going to have kids from 3 or 4 different schools in her classroom or his classroom. We are trying to group the kids together as much as possible. If we've got Stone kids, let's say we've got from Stone Academy, we've got 25 kids, and that's enough for a class. And we would try to group those kids together so that they are all at least from the same community. So we do that as much as possible. So just to kind of keep the sense of community together as much as we can. So that will be something that we would talk about on the virtual Meet the Teacher night as well. But because they're having kids from multiple schools, obviously they can't be in 4 different places at one point. So it wouldn't necessarily be a time to meet the teacher on those LEAP weeks for the virtual program because that teacher would not necessarily be there. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I know I heard Molly Spearman say that she felt like it was important for the virtual students to have at least some kind of in-person opportunity to meet their teacher. Is Greenville County Schools looking to do that?
So it wouldn't be an in-person meet their teacher, just because of the size and scope of our district. And
Okay.
again, not being able to lump, we could do that if we could lump all, again, the Stone kids into one class and the Stone, and all of that. But just because we do have kind of scattered across the district, it's not going to be possible for us to meet in person that teacher. But it would be, again, possible that we'll do, obviously, the virtual meet the teacher. It just would not be possible in our case and our size to do that across.
Okay. Can you tell us, will there be any virtual field trips or real ones for children this year?
We do have virtual field trips planned. So those are already in the works. Our teachers, we'll be working with our teachers when they are, and we're still in the process of bringing teachers on board. That will be completed this week. So we also are hoping by the end of this week that we'll put schedules out so that teachers and parents can begin to know which students are going to be in which classes. It's been a little bit of a challenge scheduling 24,000 students all at one time. And so we're still working through that to get that done. But yes, we would hope that by the end of this week, they'll have those schedules ready to go.
And will the virtual field trips be for both virtual school and in-person school?
Yes, we do virtual field trips quite a bit, even in our in-person classes, our brick and mortar. We've done that for about 10 years. We are planning to ramp that up a little bit more. For example, Roper Mountain Science Center obviously is going to look very different this year with the in-person field trips. And so one of the things they've done is actually convert a lot of that to virtual field trips that they'll be delivering. Still be able to have somewhat of the experience. I mean, they'll be out, some of you may have seen those in the spring where we were actually outside doing, still looking at the animals, still doing some of those kind of hands-on field trips for the students. We don't have any in-person field trips planned really for either right now. We're kind of waiting to see how that goes. And unfortunately, and also many of the places that we would normally do field trips are still significantly limiting.
Right. I know we already answered the question about virtual students completing work outside normal school hours. So for those just coming on now, the answer was yes, they can, as long as they are logging in each day. You can correct me, Jeff, if I get this wrong. And they should be trying to get on their reading class because that's with their teacher. Can you tell us, how will they do high school courses like chemistry and arts virtually?
So those will be done very similar. If for some reason a high school could not offer a course, they will contact the parents and just say, hey, we can't offer this, whatever that happens to be. That would be more likely to be done, more likely with singleton classes, not so much with things like chemistry and art, or the virtual or the performing arts, so to speak. We're going to do those online. Some parents have chosen to still send their students in for, things like band or orchestra or chorus, which is you can certainly do that, but we are going to offer a virtual option of those courses too. Just try to cater to both parents who may feel comfortable sending them in, parents who may not feel comfortable sending them in. Obviously, the experience is going to be a little different if you're online with band and chorus. It's going to be a little different. Art, maybe not so much because it can be a little bit more independent. And while we're on that subject, I think most people know that, but the Career Center courses and the Fine Arts Center courses at the Fine Arts Center, those are still having to be done in person. Just because we cannot meet the state certification requirements, particularly for the career centers, if the kids are full virtual. Now, the good thing is, again, you'll only be there, for 1 day a week. You'll only be 25% of the kids there, and those spaces in those classrooms are much larger than our normal classroom. So, definitely can social distance. We still have all the sanitizing and cleaning in place to make sure we can still keep students safe, even if they're attending in person.
Now, how will those courses work if we're not on a full 5-day schedule?
So they would still work the same way. They go to their Career Center and Fine Arts Center every day. So if we're still 1 day a week, they would still be, in that one day a week face-to-face, and then they would do e-learning with the students, on the other days, just like the other teachers would. And we, may have to shuffle some things around like we did in the spring, where on the days they're actually in attendance, we're doing more of the hands-on work, particularly at the career centers. So we can make sure the kids are getting their hours in so we can meet the state certification requirements for their certificate.
Now let's go back to chemistry and biology. Will the students have labs if they're virtual?
So we have some labs that we have some labs that are virtual labs. Some of those we do anyway in the brick and mortar because it's not as safe to do some of those labs with chemicals that we wouldn't want students to have access to necessarily. So we have a little bit more virtual labs, and then we are toying with the idea of having some, particularly for chemistry, having some in-person labs that might be on a Saturday where students can come in and do some labs. We're still trying to work through that. And again, that wouldn't be necessarily a requirement for kids, again, or parents who don't feel safe sending their students in. But we do want students to still have some of the benefits to have the hands-on, experience with those, particularly chemistry, because it is so it is much more lab intensive than maybe a biology or, some of the other physics courses.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you talk to us a little bit about what virtual school will look like for gifted students or students in the challenge program?
Yeah, so it'll look very similar to the brick and mortar school in the sense that they would still go to challenge, their 1 day a week if it's elementary, or it depends on the school. Some kids actually break it up a couple days a week they do, and then one does a larger group grouping. Let's say on Friday, they may do a 3-hour GT class. So we are working on scheduling that, but they'll have their same amount of hours that they would normally have in the elementary level. Middle school, of course, it's going to be a class, so we're still going to offer English honors. We'll still offer GT, 6th grade GT, 7th grade GT. So we're still offering all of those courses in middle school for the gifted and talented students. And like I said, same thing would be for our ELL students. So just like they may go out for ELL services, they would still have those ELL services or SPED services during the virtual program blocks.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I've asked you all the questions that we prepared ahead of time. Do you have time for us to take some reader questions too? Sure. Okay. Let me just see. Sorry, it'll take me a minute because I will need to read it. I think you talked about this a little bit, but we can talk about it some more while I'm finding some other questions. What will the one-on-one help look like from teachers for students that need it?
So that's a great question. So they will be able to get some one-on-one help, certainly in those 30-minute blocks if they need it. But every day, teachers also have office hours. And so parents and students can actually schedule that office hour with the teacher. And so they would then do the one-on-one with the parent, with the student at that point in time. So that's every day they have those office hours already built into their schedule. And then, like I said, also during the 30-minute blocks, a lot of times once that lesson's done, if a teacher sees a child struggling or a couple of children struggling, they may go ahead and pull those students, ask them to stay on the Google Meets so that they can kind of dig a little deeper with the students and either remediate the lack of the deficit knowledge.
I'm not sure if this has been something that you, sorry, I actually clicked on the wrong question that I was planning on paying, but this is a good one. If we have our own Chromebooks that we bought, can we use them?
You can use your own Chromebooks. The only exception to that is there are some things that don't work great on personal Chromebooks. We found out in the spring. You can use them. We would just say if you're having some technical issues, you might want to switch over to ours. We would ask that everybody take one. Also, there are going to be a couple times sometimes during the year where the testing is going to be required that we have to do. And so the only Chromebook we can actually lock down when it comes to browsers, which is a requirement for us to do online testing, would be our own Chromebook. So certainly you could use your own Chromebook if you wanted to, but there is going to be a certain time that you may need to pull out our Chromebook for those testing days where we're required to lock down the browser.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. We have a question from Francisca. Will kids on the virtual plan be able to interact with each other using their Chromebooks for virtual meetings?
So yeah, so Google has fixed some of those issues that we had. The reason we had to block that was because students were creating their own Google Meet sessions, which again, not always a bad thing, but we also want to make sure they're monitored. We also want to make sure that what students are doing in those Google Meet sessions is appropriate, and so yes, they fixed some of that issue now, so that once a teacher leaves a Google Meets classroom, it closes that Google Meets classroom down. But teachers can still set up Google Meets classrooms for students if they need to do some things like collaborate over a project or collaborate on a project they're working on.
I have a question from Ann Mack that kind of goes beyond the full scope of this, but she's asking about what happened to the roadmap plan where students would not attend any days a week if COVID risk is high. I was just wondering, maybe this would be a good opportunity for you to discuss where GCS is right now with their roadmap and their expectations for the fall, because I know there's been a lot of confusion with all the different memos that have come out and press conferences.
So that roadmap is still in place. That's still from that 0 to 5, 0 days to 1 day, 2 day, and 5 days. So that's still in place. And if I was just using the 1 day as an example kind of throughout this, I guess. So I'm sorry if I if that was confusing. That still is a very possibility as well that we could start on 0 days, full e-learning starting off. I believe I'm not mistaken. And like you said, Bethany, there's been so many memos. I have a hard time sometimes keeping track myself.
Yes.
Because we keep changing from the state, and therefore we have to change and pivot. And so I believe Dr. Royster, I think we communicated that we would try to announce the opening plan by next Monday. I think it was the 10th. I think is what was said. Don't quote me on that. I have to go back and look at the actual memo. But again, that could be a 0, 1, 2 scenario. We are still following that same roadmap we put out a few, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago.
And when do you expect to tell us when what the first week of school will look like?
I believe that'll be on the 10th. Is
Okay.
what Dr. Royster, or what we put out last week, I believe, was what we would try to tell parents 2 weeks out on that. We have a board meeting tomorrow, so some of that may come from the board meeting tomorrow as well.
Okay.
We have that, so certainly within the next week or so, you should know that.
Here's a great question from Mandy. She wants to know if virtual kids can pick up library books.
That's a great question, Mandy. I don't see why we could not do that. I agree that most of the libraries are still home. I think we could probably provide some service to that. I'm going to write that down actually, and I will tell you we have subscribed to several more digital library repositories as well. So we have those available too for digital books, but that's a great question, and that's something we'll discuss with our media specialists in our schools to see if they could provide some sort of almost like curbside pickup, or almost where you can come in and just pick up the library books that you may have reserved online. So we definitely will look into that for you.
Lisa would like to know if the elementary reading group is during school hours only.
So that the 30 minutes or so, 20, 30 minutes, maybe a little less if it's younger grades, is still during school hours only, just because that's when our teachers are available between the hours of 7:45 to the 2:15. And we'll record some of those things that we can in ELA and reading. The reading group itself is going to be a little bit more difficult to record, but there will still be assignments, that comes with that reading group, as far as for students to still continue to read books and to practice some of those maybe deficit skills they may be struggling with.
Maria would like to know, can schoolwork from during the school week be done over the weekend?
Yeah, so certainly you can do some of that during the weekend as well. It's just important you log in each day and complete the assignments that are due that day, or reach out to the teacher if there's some sort of extenuating circumstance or circumstances you need to, maybe it's some concept your child's struggling with and you want to have more time when you're maybe not working on the weekend to work with the student on that, then certainly just reach out to the teacher about that. We're trying to provide flexibility. Knowing that many parents have chosen this option that still have to work and still are working around work schedules, even if they're working from home. So yeah, just notify the teacher and just say, hey, I need to work with my child on this concept over the weekend. Is it okay if it's due, Monday or whenever it happens to be? And we're going to do our best to work with you on that.
That's helpful. We have someone wondering if the Magna and IB program schedule for virtual program is finalized.
So the IB is typically mostly in our high schools. We have some in elementary. The high schools are working through their schedules right now. So those should be finalized, hopefully again this week, next week. I will say we have a large waiting list for the virtual program. So we are still going to be hopefully later this week adding students to the virtual program. So if you're on that waiting list, so schedules are going to be a little bit in flux until school starts, just because we are trying to accommodate as many parents as possible. Same would be with the magnet schools. They're still working through their schedules, given the number of kids that have come out of their school now for virtual.
So this question probably connects with that, but Kelly wants to know how she's going to find out if her child was accepted in virtual learning.
So Kelly, if you applied, your child has been accepted into virtual learning. You are welcome to, it's probably easier. It is very difficult right now because we have so many calls coming in. If you will just email GCS virtual, I can post this in the chat actually, or maybe Bethany. GCS virtual at greenville.k12.sc.us. We have a whole group of people answering those emails. So we can confirm that for you. Still look your child up on the spreadsheet, make sure we got the application and everything. But yeah, it may be if you can't get through to the call center, it may be easier to just email the virtual because they stay on top. We've got a whole group of people monitoring that every hour. So it might get a quicker answer that way.
That is helpful to have that email address. And you may have already answered this, but can parents still apply for virtual school even though the deadline has passed?
So you can still apply. The application is still open. At this point in time, it goes on a waiting list. And like I said, we're working through balancing rosters now. We have several, families who signed up for virtual, but their kids weren't enrolled in the actual brick and mortar schools, which is a requirement. You do have to, because it's a program, not a school, you do have to be enrolled in a Greenville County school.
Okay.
So those parents would have gotten emails, will be getting emails if they didn't already today, making sure that they sign up and just tell them they have to go to a brick and mortar school to register. Otherwise, we'll drop them from the virtual program so we can let other kids in from the waiting list. So yeah, anybody who's now kind of maybe thinking they wanted to sign up for virtual, we'd go ahead and still recommend that you go ahead and sign up on the waiting list. And we will work through those this week.
Mandy would like to know if the laptops are touchscreen for kindergarten.
The Chromebooks that we have are not touchscreen for kindergarten.
Okay. Trying to see if we have any other. Okay, this is a good question because I know my family ran into this, though we're in a different district. But what if how is GCS going to deal with problems with the kid cannot get to certain things on their Chromebook that they need to for class?
So again, if on that one, number one, make sure you're using our Chromebooks. Ideally, if you're having any kind of problem, just switch off to see if it's an issue with a personal Chromebook. This past spring, teachers pivoted very quickly to e-learning, and knew we had some training issues and some technical issues we had to work through with our teachers as well. So hopefully this year, that will not be an issue with the permissions in the Google Classroom. It's also very important. A lot of common mistake too was kids were not logged into their Google account, or if they were on a personal device. A lot of times it was logged on with mom and dad's account. And a lot of our stuff is set to only allow the @greenvilleschools.us domain. So always check to make sure the child actually is logged on too. And you're right, Alex, certainly there were some things that did not work, but we worked through those this past spring. And again, we train teachers on how to set their permissions to make sure that those, hopefully that won't happen again, but email the teacher if it does. We have a whole technical, support for the virtual program. So any problems you're having, email the teacher and we'll work on making sure we get that fixed for you.
I know we did address this. India was wondering about the school supply list, and India, we discussed that will be released. Did you say this week?
Yes, it'll be released this week before the tax-free weekend.
Yes, so we can finally go out and get our school supplies. So that will be nice. I know you talked about this some, but can you specify more about how the parents will get those Chromebooks if they're not going to LEAP? Are there certain times they have to go to school?
There would be certain times, so just check with your school on that. They will most likely still ask that you follow that same attendance, that one-day attendance plan based on your color in the day. So if you're, whatever color for Monday, let's say you're assigned on Monday, we are trying to work through getting those Chromebooks out. Some schools are doing it a little earlier, like the week of the 10th, next week actually, week of the 10th. So if you have not gotten a communication yet from your school, just call your school and ask them about when you could pick up Chromebooks for the virtual program students. You should be able to still do that during the LEAP week, though, even if you do not attend the school, even if you're not sending your children to the LEAP week, you should be able to still pick that up. You're going to be there anyway if you do send them, so you can they'll get it actually while they're in the school. They'll get their Chromebook and pack and everything they need. But yeah, within the next 2 weeks, as far as the 10th or the 17th is really when we're asking schools to set their pickup times.
We had a couple of people asking this. They're asking if they do have their own Chromebooks, if you're going to have setup instructions that they can access.
So the only thing, Zach, really you would have to set up is there's nothing really to download. Google Chrome is really what we use for the most part for everything. So Google Meets and Google Classroom. So as long as you can just open the browser and get the classroom.google.com and have your students sign in with their username and password, as long as you sign in, they should then see all of their their middle school, they'll have several classrooms for each period. If it's an elementary student, they'll probably just have one or two. But outside of that, the great thing about Chromebooks is they pretty much, you pull them out of the box, open it up, and you're almost ready to go. from that standpoint. Yeah, just log into Chrome, and we have directions. We are finalizing our website, but we have some directions for parents that we released in the spring on Google Classroom and Google Meets. And certainly those are still posted actually on our eLearning website. All parents probably would need to have access to those in case they have any problems. But that actually just shows you how to use Google Meets, how to log in, and how to access Google Classroom as well. And it's in both Spanish and English.
Debbie would like to know if her child doesn't attend the LEAP day, when they're going to take the required testing.
So right now, Debbie, the state has said we cannot test online for the required testing. They've gone back and forth a couple of times on that. So unless that changes, they would not take that required pre-test because the state would not allow us to do that online. The only way we can do the pre-test and the post-test is in person. So that is not the test necessarily we would be using to assess our students for where they are. Our teachers will be using their own assessment and pre-assessments. Certainly they can use those tests if the kids take them. It'll give them some information. But as I said, it was on last year's content. We've kind of built pre-assessments in before each unit. So the kids actually, the teacher knows as we're getting ready to start a unit on, let's say, subtraction. Okay, here's what Bethany knows about subtraction. She's really struggling with this concept. So we'll do that a lot of times, like we already do that in the brick and mortar school. But yeah, with the state required pre-tests, we are not allowed to do that online. So it has to be a face-to-face test, and it has to be within the first 10 days of school. That's why we're doing it on Leap Week. And then anybody who can't attend Leap Week for some reason, if they send their kid, if we're in the 1 day a week attendance or 2 day a week attendance, as long as we're attending 1 day, we would administer that to any child within the first 10 days of school that didn't take it. But we are required to have it done within the first 10 days.
If someone does want their child in orchestra and they're in the virtual program, how do they go about getting their child in that in-person class?
So you would just need to contact your guidance counselors, whoever your child's guidance counselor is. They're the ones working on the schedules at the school. So I would just recommend reaching out to the counselor, whoever your child is. If you don't know who your child's counselor might be, if they're new to the school, you can call the main number and they can connect you with the person who would be in charge of either the alphabet that you fall into or the grade level.
What will related arts look like for elementary school in the virtual program?
So related arts will look similar to a little bit like the spring did. We've changed a little bit of that for the summer. Our teachers have been working on recording videos and recording lessons for students. So that is going to be a little bit more independent for our elementary students, but they will still have an art block. They'll still have a PE block and a music block, just like they did during the school day. As you probably know, they really only go to related arts. They have music once a week, typically art once a week, PE once a week. And so they'll still have those videos to go through that they can look at the content and do the work from that. And the teachers are available if they have questions on that. Arts is very difficult because you have a team typically per school, or a team and a half per school. And so unlike the general ed teachers, when you have 30 kids come out, you can pull a teacher. Or 25 kids. For the art and music and PE related arts, we can't do that because those teachers are still needed in their schools. So we brought on two teams of related arts teachers to serve our virtual program, but it will be a little bit more self-paced for sure than the general core classes will be.
So I was just wondering why you're saying that. Will the kids need special supplies for art class that they would normally need?
So we try to keep that pretty much to a minum, or we've altered in some cases the lessons. Obviously, there's lessons on, clay and some different things depending upon the grade level or painting and different things. So we tried to limit that so parents aren't buying, $50, $60, $100 worth of supplies for art. So we've altered the activities this summer so we can minimize those lists for parents.
Nicole wants to know if they mark that they want to go back in January, if they'll be given priority as space is available. Do you know?
So we were just doing that simply to find out how many parents were looking at the whole year versus semester. So we'll send out again in November, probably November, early December. We'll send out again to find out what parents, indication might be. Do they want them to return at the semester end, or if not, that is our time where we would have flexibility to move teachers back to the brick and mortar school. Because again, we're using the same teachers we have already. We're not hiring teachers for the virtual program outside of what we have. We're just shuffling around. So we would, at that point in time, look and see how many parents and kids want to go back. and then look to see how many we can shuffle back to the schools. So it will be based on space available.
So I'm going to go ahead and do our last question. Just for those of you who are watching, I know you're still asking questions. We will go through those. Some of them have already been answered, so we'll try to just answer you in the comments. And some are not related to virtual learning or e-learning. So we'll answer those that we're able to from other communication that GCS has released. But I thought this last question was a really good one to end on. Sorry, and they keep on like flipping on me. Jessica said, how will e-learning be improved this year from what we saw last year?
So for the 100% e-learning, again, that would be vastly different from what you saw in the spring, because we are requiring teachers to follow a schedule similar to what our virtual program is following, where they're doing live sessions for each subject, spending a lot more time interacting with the students. If they're on the 1 or 2 day a week, the big difference is we've created a lot of content over the summer. Our teachers, we've directed that from the academics division. We've hired teachers to come in and create content. So the teachers have access to more videos and have access to more activities than they would have had in the spring, where they had to create those themselves. Obviously, though, on the 1 or 2 day a week attendance, again, they have about 30 to 45 minutes a day to check in with students on the e-learning, who are home e-learning, because they are teaching a class 4 days a week. And similar on Friday, they would check in with the kids in the morning, probably overview the work for the day, and then kind of set the students loose on that. I do think the big difference would be, though, on the 1 or 2 day, is that the students are in class. They'll have an opportunity to be in class 1 day a week, 2 days a week, which will allow us to front load a lot more material, and will allow us to help students who are struggling throughout the week. When you only have 5 or 6 kids in a class, it's a lot easier to give that one-on-one attention, so to speak.
So before we end today, Jeff, can you just give parents any last advice you would have as they enter this school year, and then also address how, if they have questions that are still remaining unanswered, that they can get answers for those questions?
Yeah, so the questions would be, the easiest thing really is to do the virtual email, because we have so many people already logged in and answering those questions as they come in. So that's just GCS virtual at greenville.k12.sc.us. And then as far as just advice for parents, again, we've had a lot of questions in our email about the waiting list. If you'll just be patient this week as we finalize the schedules of the kids who had registered, and then we find out really who needs to exit. We do have, some people exiting. Some people have asked to unenroll from the program, and we are doing that as we get those. You'll need to contact your school for that. Okay. They are now in the virtual block, and so the school actually has to remove them, make sure they have room in the classes still. To put a student back in the brick and mortar school, so to speak. And then we will be this week working through, probably Wednesday, Thursday, we'll be working through adding to the waiting list kids over to the virtual program. So if you'll just kind of be patient with us on that while we get those, again, 24,000 some kids that signed up for virtual, about a third of our district signed up for virtual. And so it's just a large lot of moving parts to try to get everything completed. But we're, hopefully this week we'll be about 80% done with everything that we need to complete, and then next week finish up everything.
Well, thank you so much. And I know I speak for everyone else just to say how much we appreciate you taking time to come on today and answer some of these questions. And for those of you who are watching, thanks for joining in. Continue to ask your questions, because we may be able to get an answer for some of them. And, they will also help us know what else we can address on Coming Around Greenville. But thank you so much, Jeff, and we appreciate all of your work for our kids this year, and thank you for all your help.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.